They trapped her in the Class 8 sparring ring. The Deathworld girl pulled back her hair. The Galactic Military Academy of Valoris had seen many things in its 400 years of operation. It had seen Kreth warriors crack durasteel walls with their bare fists. It had seen Uran psychics collapse entire rooms with a single displaced thought. It had seen the Lori monks enter meditative combat states so deep that their hearts slowed to 3 beats per minute while their reflexes accelerated past measurable thresholds. It had never seen a human female pull her hair into a ponytail and make the entire observation deck go silent. Commander Kale Veyron stood at the edge of the Class 8 sparring ring with his arms folded and his jaw set. He was not a cruel man by nature. But he was an efficient one. And when efficiency demanded a lesson be taught, he taught it without apology. Mara Ellison had been trouble since the day she arrived. Not disciplinary trouble. Not behavioral trouble. The kind of trouble that disrupted assumptions. She had placed in the top 4% of the Academy's entrance cognitive assessments. She had outrun the Vreth candidates in the endurance trials, a species that could sprint at 60 km per hour for 3 hours without fatigue. When the combat theory instructor had posed a scenario about a 3-front siege with limited resources, Mara had solved it in 11 minutes. The previous record was 43, held by a Valori with 4 centuries of ancestral tactical memory. She was human. From Earth. From a Class 3.7 Deathworld. The instructors had initially dismissed the scores as anomalies. Statistical outliers. Perhaps the assessment calibration was off. Perhaps the endurance trials had a flaw. Perhaps the siege scenario had an obvious solution they were too proud to notice. Then Mara Ellison started sparring. And that was when Commander Kale Veyron decided he needed to have a conversation with her. Not with words. Cadet Ellison. His voice carried across the gymnasium floor with the practiced authority of a man who had commanded fleets. You've been placed in the Class 8 sparring ring for your afternoon evaluation. 30 heads turned. Every cadet in the hall knew what Class 8 meant. It was not where humans were placed. Ever. The Class 8 ring was reserved for the physically apex species, Kreth warriors, Dorvani shock soldiers, the occasional Urek berserker who needed somewhere to burn excess aggression. The environmental dampeners were set to simulate a 1.8 standard gravity field. The ring itself had reinforced walls specifically because Class 4 and below rings kept cracking. Humans were Class 2.1 on the Galactic Standard Physical Index. Class 8 was not a sparring assignment. It was a message. Kale watched her face carefully. He expected confusion. Perhaps indignation. Some of the more politically aware cadets might recognize the move for what it was and bristle. A few, the fragile ones, might pale. Mara Ellison looked at the ring. Then she looked at him. Then she reached up and pulled her hair back into a ponytail. It was such a small gesture. Economical. Unhurried. The gesture of someone who had done something difficult so many times that the preparation for it had become muscle memory rather than ritual. Kale felt, for the first time in 11 years of commanding cadets, a flicker of something he did not immediately recognize. He recognized it 3 seconds later. It was unease. Her assigned opponent was Durovoth. A Kreth. 2.3 meters tall, 412 kilograms of evolved predator biology that had spent 6 million years optimizing for one purpose on a moon with a gravity field that would flatten a human being in under 4 minutes. Duro had not lost a sparring match in 2 years. His file contained the phrase structurally concerning in the notes section, which at the Academy was the institutional equivalent of a standing ovation. Duro looked at Mara the way you look at something you don't quite understand and are mildly concerned about understanding. He stepped into the ring. Mara stepped in after him. The gravity field engaged. 1.8 standard. Kale watched the human girl's posture shift, a micro-adjustment, a slight widening of her stance, a subtle redistribution of weight to her lower center of mass. The movement was so small and so precise that it took him a moment to register that she had done it at all. She had compensated. Instantly. Without apparent effort. Earth, he reminded himself. Class 3.7. Surface Gravity 1.0 Standard. Variable Terrain. Significant atmospheric variance by altitude. Reported apex predators that pursue prey across multiple biomes for days without rest. Reported human survival behavior that other species xenobiologists have classified as. The match began. Duro Voth was fast. For a Kreth, he was exceptionally fast. He moved with the lethal fluidity of something that had been designed rather than evolved, and his opening strike was a sweeping low attack meant to take out knee joints, which was the anatomical weakness his species' combat doctrine had identified as the universal soft point in bipedal organisms. Mara was not there when it arrived. She had moved, not back, not away, but sideways and slightly into the strike's arc, close enough that the force dissipated before it could connect, and her hand was already on Duro's forearm, not gripping, just redirecting. The kind of force management that required either decades of dedicated training or an instinct so deep it had become biological. Kale was on his feet without deciding to stand. What followed lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He knew because he checked the ring timer afterward, needing something concrete to hold on to. In those 4 minutes and 17 seconds, Mara Ellison did not defeat Duro Voth. She was not large enough, not strong enough, and the honest answer was that against raw Kreth physiology in a high-gravity field, no human should have lasted 4 minutes. She lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds by never being where the force was. She moved like water finding paths through stone. Every time Duro committed to a strike, she was already somewhere adjacent, already making the geometry of the exchange work against his mass and momentum. She used the reinforced walls. She used the gravity itself. Twice she made Duro's own force work for her with such efficiency that the Kreth stumbled, which was something Kale had genuinely never seen. When it ended, when Duro finally landed a glancing strike that sent Mara skidding across the ring floor and the system registered a match conclusion, the gymnasium was silent. Not the polite silence of a crowd watching something impressive. The stunned silence of people rearranging their understanding of what was possible. Mara stood up. She had a bruise forming across her left cheekbone and her lip was split. She rolled her shoulder once, methodically, the way you check a joint after stress. Then she looked at Duro Voth. "Good match," she said. Her voice was level. Duro stared at her. Then he made a sound that the translation matrix rendered as "you are a very strange creature," which from a Kreth was the closest thing to a compliment their culture produced. Kale walked to the edge of the ring. He had intended to say something, he'd had a speech prepared, something about proper placement protocols and the purpose of evaluation metrics. The words were gone. He looked at the human girl with the split lip and the blood on her chin and the utterly calm expression, and he asked the only question that was actually in his head. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Mara looked at him. There was something in her expression that he couldn't read immediately, not pride, not defiance. Something quieter and older. "Home," she said. He waited. She seemed to consider whether to continue. "Then, Earth has 37,000 classified predator species. About 400 of them will actively hunt humans. We've been navigating that since before we had language. Every child that grows up in the wild zones learns to read force vectors before they learn to read text." A pause. "The gravity here is actually easier. We train heavier." Kale Veyron had been commander of the Valoris Academy Combat Division for 11 years. He had written the assessment frameworks that the Galactic Alliance used to classify cadet physical capability. He had argued, in 3 separate policy reviews, that the Human Physical Index rating of 2.1 was generous. He thought about Mara Ellison moving through a Class 8 gravity field like it was a Tuesday. He thought about 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He thought about "we train heavier." Cadet Ellison, he said finally. Sir. Report to my office tomorrow morning. We're going to have a conversation about your assessment file. She nodded once. Professional. Then she pulled the tie from her ponytail, shook her hair loose, and walked toward the exit like someone who had done something difficult so many times that it had stopped feeling like anything at all. Behind her, Durovoth was still staring. Around the observation deck, 30 cadets from 14 species were very quietly revising their assumptions about humanity. And Commander Cale Veyron stood at the edge of a Class 8 ring, looking at the scuff marks Mara Ellison's boots had left on the floor, and thought about what it meant that a species could live on a world that spent millions of years trying to kill them, and not only survive, but walk away from it with that look in their eyes. Not hardness. Not rage. Just the calm of something that had already seen worse. He picked up his datapad. Changed the physical assessment flag on file #MH7741 from 2.1, standard human to under review. It seemed like the honest thing to do.